Hey everyone, I'm Clue, and today our topic of choice is going to be card design, right? So Bright Lights introduced a bunch of inventive ideas and interactions by way of some new mechanics and some new concepts. But it also sort of highlights an issue, an ongoing issue that I personally have with the design of Flesh and Blood and what they seem to do. But before we get to the bad, we might as well go over the good, right? So we'll cut out adaptive plating and the Evos and we'll revisit them for a second. If we scroll all the way down, we obviously have new item mechanics, right? So we have Crank, Scrap, and Galvanize, right? So these are three very impactful mechanics because you have Scrap, which allows you to utilize your items from the graveyard. You have Galvanize, allows you to utilize your items in a dual purpose from the field. And then of course you have Crank, which actually allows you to get more items into play, right? Accelerates your ability to play items. So this is a fantastic level of design, right, to me, because it builds upon the systems already in place, and it does so by creating new avenues and different ways to utilize the already existing mechanics. Now, personally, I would like to see some of these ideas translate to generic items as well, right? It's a sort of missed opportunity to me to actually make a lot more items impactful, and not only that, but give Bright Lights some sort of sustain outside of just the mechanologist community. Right, had Crank been a more applicable effect across the board with items, right? Instead of, say, Steam Counter, if it was pay an extra resource to gain Go Get. Could you imagine the impact it would have had on items and being able to play items in X decks? But nonetheless, it is still great design to see them, again, building upon the already established concepts of Mechanologist by offering these different avenues to now utilize your items, be it getting your items into play quicker, being able to utilize your items in alternative and defensive ways, or being able to actually make use of them from the graveyard to then serve another purpose. Overall, it really elevates items because items have been a sore point for me when it comes to the game, right? They are definitely above average work for average payoff, which means that across the board, right, unless they're vital to some sort of combo or gimmick, they're not highly playable. Then, of course, you also have the additional boost mechanics, which are fine, right? It's just more of what Mechanologist loves to do, so that is completely fine. Mix in a few pack fillers, and altogether, the bottom aspect of Bright Lights, to me, is great. It does what it's meant to do. Again, the expansion slot, I would have liked to see extended. Again, be on par with that of Dusk Till Dawn, but I digress. Now, the other 2 points that I want to talk about. So we'll tackle adaptive plating first. This card, to me, does not belong in this set, and I don't like the whole gimmick of this is a speculative card, right? So do what you will with it. It could be absolutely busted in the future, so watch out. I don't like that idea. I think, again, modular, if you're going to do something with it, either do it now or put this in the set where it's actually going to have an impact, rather than, again, leaving it up to the community to speculate on the possible future of adaptive plating. It, to me, is just a waste of the slot, and the slot is a legendary slot, which is even worse, right? They could have created an item specific to Dash and her playstyle, similar to what they've done with Hyper X3. But nonetheless, we get adaptive plating, and I sincerely hope that they don't continue this trend of sticking cards into sets that are just there for future concepts, right? Why do that, right? Why not put them in the set where they have the most impact? And also, why waste the slots? And why not just build upon what you already have and strengthen the core concepts? Which brings us to Evos, right? Evos are a great concept, but they sort of suffer from that same issue to me as adaptive plating. What they do is they create a new system for Mechanologists that sort of runs adjacent to everything else. Now, I'm going to ask a very simple question. What if Evos were items, right? Do you think they'd be busted? Do you think they would see a lot more play? Do you think overall it would be better for the design if every Evo was an item? If every Evo was applicable to what Mechanologist likes to do by way of some of their other effects, be it Dash being able to now play some of the Evos. Again, you're limited by the cost, so 0 to 1, so you can't play the Soul, you can't play some of the other high impacts, you can't even play Sentry, right? Because it's 2 cost, and then even on old Dash, you could put a Sentry into play, but then that's just starting off with some extra block. Overall, the issue for me when it comes to Evos is you have to start with your base equipment, you then have to fish out the card, and then you have to spend resources to play it, right? Meaning that why waste the time to do all that when you could just start with better equipment? Now, where they're sort of made up for is directly through Teclovosset, which is another issue, and I've talked about this from Dusk Till Dawn as well, with the figments being hard-baked into Prism. It is very easy to draw the conclusion that Evos were designed around Teclovosset. right? Making them not necessarily Mechnologist cards, but Teklo-Vossen cards. And that is to me not great design. Again, there's easy ways to sort of up the card compatibility and make them playable, more playable, I should say, across the board, because they are playable. But again, it is that whole concept where in anyone but the Teklo-Vossens, they are now above average work for average payoff, right? So outside of class constructed more so, that is a no-go, right? Because that's just highly inefficient. And again, Flesh and Blood is a highly strategic game where you want to play as efficiently as possible. And to me, again, the Evos have been so catered towards Teklo-Vossen that they lose the impact they could have had across the board with the other heroes. Now, I'm not saying you don't want to play them, but for instance, in Max, the obvious gimmick is you want the breaker set. But there are so many other things for you to do with your hyperdrivers, let alone just obviously create resources, that you don't necessarily want to, again, take the time to set up the breaker set with the hyperdrivers. Similarly with Dash, right, there's just better things you can do that you might as well get the quicker benefit of running the Teklo Heart or some of the other pieces that you can make, that you can take full advantage of right from the get-go. And this is sort of an ongoing issue that I have seen here and there in different sets, and that is, again, this whole concept of them, rather than focusing on what's already there and building these new adjacent ideas to what already exists. Again, Mechnologist, boosted items were the core concepts. Now we have this Evo set, and there's a little bit of crossover, but not a lot, not enough to make it impactful. And it's kind of weird to me, right? Why build these two branches if you're not going to connect the dots yet? All right, same can be said for the Figments. There's a little crossover with the Heralds, but overall they are separate interactions, and that doesn't make them mesh too well. If you're going to play Prism, or New Prism, I should say, you're going to play Figments, because, again, your whole hero ability is catered to that. So whether or not they're light illusionists, right? If we had any other light illusionists, not that we do, right? But Mechanol is a bit different, because we do actually have alternative heroes, but they are basically a New Prism mechanic, not a light illusionist mechanic. And similarly, I would say that Evos are borderline a Teklo-Vossen mechanic rather than being a mechanic that stands on their own, right? Again, I'm not saying you can't run them or you don't want to run some of them in the other heroes, but they are clearly built around balancing in terms of Teklo-Vossen, and that makes them less than optimal in everyone else. At times, what it feels like to me, personally, is that Legendary Studios are sort of too good at balancing, right? They don't let a lot of things sort of slip through the cracks and allow the community to create or find ways to break the games, right? If you think of any other TCG, you can probably think of a combo that sprouted from the community, sprouted from nowhere. Yeah, sure, it might have needed an errata or a ban, within a few days, a few weeks, whatever you want, but it still sprouted from the community and felt like a community creation and was fun, right? A lot of the time, for me personally, with Flesh and Blood, it feels like LSS give us all the tools in the class, right? They know exactly how they want it to play, and we're just left to sort of connect the dots. We're not sort of creating or finding fun combos. I've looked at so many cards because I like building combo decks, and I've gone, oh cool, this would be a great combo. Then I think more about the interactions, and it's like, but there's only one real line that you can take with that, right? It's not really this boundless creativity that they showcase with their design. Again, they implement so many different mechanics. They continue to branch horizontally, not just in the class design, right? Because again, we've gone over how they can just add classes at a whim and continue to sprout horizontally rather than building upon and power creeping what's already there. And then it feels like they're doing the exact same things with a lot of the card design, rather than improving upon what was already there, like with the majority of the Bright Lights cards. Again, building upon itemization. They come up with this cool concept that they want to make work, and it becomes its own thing, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a branch of Mechnologist. Again, it feels like a Teklo-Vossen thing, right? Another parallel to this that I like to ask is Elemental Guardian, Oldhim. If Oldhim was his own separate thing, right? Had no Guardian inbuilt interactions, but was his own Frost Warrior, whatever you want to call it, right? Would he still work? Would he still have his own identity? And the answer to me a lot of the times is yeah, right? Can't say if it would be better or worse, but it does sometimes feel like it's its own thing and doesn't need to be Guardian. It feels like, again, they try to create card compatibility, but at the same time, they go out of their way to make sure that there is the bare minimum, right? To make sure that it is a Mechnologist thing. But again, you're not incentivized to run it in anyone else but Teklo-Vossen, because again, it's built around Teklo-Vossen's innate ability, right? Scrap Compactor is probably the best interaction. Scrap Compactor allows you to scrap an Evo, So if you block with an Evo, it goes in your graveyard, you can scrap it, and now you can play it from your banish zone. So that is a good mechanic. If you were to do that in anyone else, well, it's just a dead card. You trigger the scrap mechanic, but you're getting significantly less benefit than Tekla, right? Even if you're playing an Evo from your hand off of the instant speed proc of Scrap Compactor, you're now wasting a card from your hand, whereas with Tekla, you could burn it from your graveyard and have that extra card. And I do think this is a design limitation going forward, because while yes, it is creative to add all these new mechanics, there comes a point where you need to be building upon what's already there rather than trying to create these different branches and connect the dots. Again, simply put, if Evos were items, I personally think they would see significantly more play and they'd have a greater feel of impact, because now they're a lot more applicable across the board, across all the different interactions that Mechanologist already had. And then the last sort of point, well, actually, you know, do we touch on Singularity? I think this is another missed opportunity, right? That this card is on Evo. Again, Construct, but there's another point then they don't want Construct to be an Evo, they don't want it to be an item, so they had to come up with something else. Basically, that's what it seems like to me. Until there's actually a use for the Construct type, right? What point is it printing? Same with all the weapons. There are all these fringe weapons that are random things, because obviously that's what they are. But then they lose the uniformity, right? Because then you have cards that, you know, target a one-hand, target a two-hand, target a sword, target a mace, target whatever it is, and you lose out on those interactions because, again, they've gone down the creative route, but then also self-impose these limitations through card interactions, rather than leaving them open-ended, rather than, you know, having to come back at some point because they accidentally print something that's busted and do an errata, right? It's overbalanced to some extent, from my perspective, that it sort of drains some of the level of fun. Right? Now, again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because Flesh and Blood is a highly strategic game where you're rewarded for playing it well, right? The more you learn, the more you are able to actually play Flesh and Blood, the better you will do. It's not reliant on, you know, combos and gimmicks. You can actually be rewarded for your level of skill, which is fantastic. But it is nice now and then to let some things slip through the cracks, right? If this wasn't a Construct, if this was, again, an item or an Evo, more interactions, more playability, more utility, rather than, again, these self-imposed limitations. And before we end off, the last thing that I did want to talk about was, how do you feel about color variants, right? So in the beginning, red, yellow, blue, it was somewhat necessary, right? A, to fill out the set, to have more cards for drafting, but personally, we are getting to the point where we understand what makes these better than the rest, right? Why the red is better than the yellow, right? Why this value of 4 is better than 3, because, again, most people can block for 3, and it either requires them to use equipment or causes them to use another card from their hand if they want to fully block it. Then you have on-hit effects, and basically, the knowledge within the community is significantly greater. We understand the mechanics, we understand the design, that I personally feel like we're getting to the point where we don't need pack fillers of these different color variants, right? We can understand which one is the best, and at times, you know, either cut it down, right? Or, you know, insert cards with more impact. Because I think, personally, another thing that I'm seeing is, for a lot of new people, there are two big hurdles. One is the whole class system and figuring out what you want to play, and two is deck building, because of the plethora of cards. Because, again, when you look at a card, you now need to look at 3 different versions for most cards and understand which one is the one you want to run. And overall, we have developed the understanding that if you're playing X class, you generally want X color, or you have some understanding of the colors you want to run. And overall, I do just want to ask, do you think that it's still necessary to have the 3 different versions, or would you like to see more impactful cards put into the set? Because there are obvious colors that are just dead, depending on the card's mechanics and its values, right? That you would never run those color variants, because there's no reason to overall, especially in specific classes. Anyway, card design again. The majority of the set, because it builds upon what was already there by way of boost and itemization, it's fantastic. I think the item extensions are great, right? Again, Scrap, Galvanize, and Crank. Evos sort of miss the mark to me, because they are just trying to implement this new system, and it has been catered towards Tekla more so than Mechanologist, making it, again, something that doesn't mesh super well. Again, it's still usable, it still will see play, but there was a simple way to make these cards significantly better, right? And have some more interaction that wouldn't be broken either, right? I don't think giving them an item tag would have broken it at all.